All right, greetings from the Dark Continent. Conscious Caracal here, or Adams Van Sale. And tonight I'm bringing you another discussion stream where we're not going to be having a guest. We're just going to be discussing a concept or an idea or a phenomenon in politics here in South Africa or abroad. And tonight we're focusing our gaze here on South African politics and specifically the ANC. So I'm going to be talking about the cargo cult phenomenon, something that I've written 2 opinion pieces on, and how it relates to the ANC, and also how you can identify one, what type of behavior to look for, and how we see that in the ANC. So maybe just a few things to get out of the way. I've also got a Telegram channel where you can be notified when I go live or when I upload a video, and there's a link to that in the description. There's also super chats are on. Don't feel obligated to use it. It's just there if you want to really support the channel. And now let's get into the meat of this episode. So firstly, I think something that's very important to note when it comes to the ANC is that it's not that you can't really explain the ANC with just one lens. For example, you can't just explain their behavior through ideology or through personal greed or through the different factions or personalities that are in the ANC. You have to look at multiple angles. So tonight we're going to be looking at one angle, which is the cargo cultists. And I think when you look at, for example, the different factions within the ANC, you've definitely got the corrupt cadres that are just there to enrich themselves, but don't be mistaken, there are definitely ideologues in there as well that really think that they're on the right track and that they are really bringing about the national democratic revolution. And those are the cadres that I'm going to be focusing on because their behavior mirrors the behavior that we see in regards to cargo cults. So let's get started with the first piece. I'm going to be reading from here, and I'm also going to be having a look at the chat to answer your questions and also commenting on some of the stuff. So firstly, my first piece was in 2019. It was titled "The Contemporary Cargo Cult at the Southern Tip of Africa." So it starts from here. A few years ago, I stumbled upon a paper explaining the fascinating and controversial phenomenon of cargo cults. A cargo cult is conceptualized as a belief system in which its followers practice superstitious rituals in the hope of facilitating the appearance of sought-after goods, typically found in contemporary, technologically advanced, developed countries. These belief systems were first documented in New Guinea and Melanesia, of the Pacific after contact with Western troops and their advanced technology during World War II. So the belief held that copying various ritualistic acts, such as building of airport runways or radar towers out of sticks and stones, would result in the manifestation of material wealth, particularly luxury Western goods or cargo, which the people saw being offloaded from actual airplanes. These goods were believed to have been created by ancestral spirits, and they were entitled to it. So maybe just to unpack that a little bit more, what we saw there in simple terms is that they saw these airplanes coming down, offloading all this cargo onto these presumably military bases and settlements, and the dots that they connected was basically that the runways and the different buildings and the different personnel that they saw at these airports were performing a ritual to attract these airplanes. That's what their logic told them. So then naturally what they did was they built actual like mock airports, radar towers, runways, airplanes, out of sticks and stones, thinking that this will attract these airplanes that are bringing all this cargo and all this wealth and all this prosperity. And they waited for decades for one of these planes to arrive, which of course never did. Some of them, even to this day, to my knowledge, are still waiting with their radar towers and runways made out of sticks and stones. So according to the literature on the subject, cargo cults commonly develop during a combination of crises. It is particularly under conditions of social stress that such a movement may form under the leadership of a charismatic figure who has a vision of a brighter, prosperous future. This leader usually prescribes the dismantling of the old social order and the introduction of a new set of rituals to achieve the envisioned utopia. So this short summary reminds you of the current South African political landscape with its promise of a bright new dawn. I guess great minds think alike, or fools never differ, you decide. And that's exactly the type of thing we see with the Ramaphosa administration and all their praise singers and cheerleaders, the new dawners, as I call them. It rolls off the tongue, particularly if you're Afrikaans. What you're seeing from them is all these promises of the old way of doing things is gone, the old world is dead, we're bringing about a new dawn, a new dispensation, or almost like a new paradigm. And unfortunately, we haven't seen any of that manifest. If any of the developments since Ramaphosa took office in 2018 have been any indicator, it's just more of the same. Corruption has not been dealt with. It's getting worse, actually, with us seeing during the lockdown blatant theft and looting of funds intended for the sick and the vulnerable. That's the type of stuff that we're seeing from the ANC. Eskom is not being fixed. We're still suffering under load shedding, and then you have to ask the question: how much longer does Cyril Ramaphosa have in order to solve these problems? So, continuing in this piece, in his 2019 State of the Nation address, we just had our 2021 State of the Nation address, so you can see some parallels here. So in his 2019 State of the Nation address, President Ramaphosa enchanted the imaginations of many new dawners with promises of spectacular new cities rising out of empty plains, titanic skyscrapers stretching towards the heavens, and a bullet train that will revolutionize the way South Africans think about intercity commutes. All these utopian visions do a decent job of exciting the mind's eye. However, they all collapse when confronted with a single question: how? Furthermore, in 2019, President Ramaphosa signed the Carbon Tax Act of 2019 into law, a bizarre step, indeed, for a country that produces 1.3% of global carbon emissions and struggles to avoid electricity blackouts. So just to flesh out this point a bit, what we're seeing with, for example, the signing of this carbon tax bill, this Carbon Tax Act, is pretty much the ANC looking towards Western countries, or actually a lot of countries, the biggest economies in the world. They're seeing these economies or these countries are very environmentally conscious. They are looking at their carbon emission or their carbon footprint, and they are signing all these types of acts to regulate their carbon emissions. Therefore, if we do that as well, we're going to be performing the ritual that will bring the type of success as these countries. Same with building skyscrapers and smart cities and bullet trains. It's all this logic of looking at other countries, seeing, well, what is their recipe for success? They have skyscrapers, they have bullet trains, they have carbon regulation. Let's do that. Let's see if that brings about the prosperity. You can already see the parallel in thinking between those cargo cults that I mentioned and the Ramaphosa administration. Let me just, before I continue, I'm afraid South Africa's own brand of cargo cultists are putting the cart before the horse when they promise us a new age of unprecedented material prosperity without first getting the basics right. Rather than displaying innovative ambition that is based on sound economic principles, they much closer resemble a misguided, albeit also ambitious, youth who has been convinced by a pulp self-help book that the first step towards success is dressing the part. So what you're seeing here again is that logic of, how do I become rich? How do I become successful? Well, let's look at some successful and rich men. Well, what do? They wear nice suits. Therefore, the recipe for success is to dress in nice suits. That's the logic of the ANC cargo cult at work, when they imitate the wrong things when it comes to the countries that they're trying to emulate. Continuing, A growing number of people seem to notice that the emperor is wearing no clothes, yet few are actually brave enough to say it. The reason may be found in Alexander Solzhenitsyn's book, The Gulag Archipelago, which you can see here behind me, in which he describes how Joseph Stalin was able to ensure an 11-minute standing ovation after one of his speeches, as the first person to stop clapping was promptly arrested. And I think you can see where I'm going with that in regards to cancel culture and things that we're seeing in the South African zeitgeist. Alas, in a socialist's mind, it seems that utopia is always just one more government-run scheme away. The eternal promise of the state remains. We recognize the problem, all we need is more power, control, and taxes to solve it. They promise a much bigger cake by copying a few fake capitalistic rituals, which they then blend into their socialist mix. The National Health Insurance Bill, or NHI, rising over the seemingly dawnless horizon, is yet another apt example of a regime attempting to run before they've even mastered the art of the crawl. And this was in 2019, and we can still see those exact same promises coming from the ANC in 2021. How the more things change, the more they stay the same, as they say. Continuing, the ANC has become remarkably adept at manufacturing the illusion of progress through window dressing. To help maintain this facade, the ANC practices the peculiar ritual of meticulously constructing elaborate monsters out of straw, which they immediately cut down with immense pride, zeal, and fervor. They shout from the hilltops that the main obstacle standing between South Africa and unbridled prosperity is the resilient and haunting ghost of apartheid, which they valiantly attempt to exorcise by removing Afrikaans symbols and changing street and school names. So what we're seeing here, as I said, they were creating these monsters out of straw. You can hear this. The best example of this is exactly what we saw with Finance Minister Tito Mbowene's tweets recently, just before SAUNA, and the tweets where he said white supremacist thinking is still a big problem in South Africa, and these white people still see black people as servants and whatever. I'm not even going to get into all the content of his vile anti-white tirade that he went into. Again, a little nudge towards those among us that say, don't worry, Tito Mbowene is one of the good carders. Dude, trust me. But yeah, that's the type of thinking that we see. They create these fake monsters of racism, white supremacy, institutional racism, and then they chop them down and say, what a big victory this was for the ANC. We changed the street name. The ANC is back, baby. So yeah, that's what we see there. And it works for them to a large extent. I mean, it is a very efficient political tool to create this facade of progress. But yeah, the ANC have become very adept at that. Continuing. The tragic and cruel reality, however, is that impoverished, unemployed South Africans have no sleepless nights about the name of the street corner on which they beg daily. Yet the ANC's ritualistic attempts to do battle with the apparent original sin of racism will not create a single job, provide one meal, remove one pit toilet, or cure one ill person. I mean, that speaks for itself. I don't think I have to go elaborate too much there. So as the poor Melanesian cargo cults, the ANC seems to believe that by artificially emulating some of the capitalist fruits of success, they will usher in socialist prosperity for the nation. However, it's becoming increasingly clear for all to see that these fruits more closely resemble the plastic fruit observed by tourists in North Korean shop windows. And so we wait at our airports made of clay and sticks for the return of the plane of prosperity, which has, unbeknownst to us, chosen a different destination with a proper runway and no load shedding. If we continue to allow ourselves to be led by our noses down this misguided utopian socialist garden path, the only thing from the developed world we will attract will be a few curious academics who are perplexed and fascinated by this contemporary cargo cult stranded on the southern tip of Africa. So that was my first opinion piece that I wrote in 2019. This precedes the entire COVID pandemic and all the lockdowns and the ANC's big failures in that regard. I'm just going to give the chat some attention before we go on to the next piece. Goeienaand, Joost Strydom. Ek hoop dit gaan goed daar in Oranje. Ek kom kuier binnekort. Charlie Erasmus. Goeienaand meneer. Ek hoop dit gaan goed. And then Sideline Opinions with the first comment on the content of the stream. He says the voters will never hold the ANC/SACP, for those who don't know, SACP, South African Communist Party, accountable. Therein lies our bondage to self-destruction. And he just posted another comment. With the social grants honeypot, the ANC/SACP catches new cargo cultists in large numbers. Maybe just a little bit of a side note for my international listeners. A lot of people aren't aware about the South African Communist Party within the ANC. So the ANC is part of what we call the Tripartite Alliance. It is the ANC, South African Communist Party, and COSATU, which are the unions, the labor unions. And this Tripartite Alliance rules South Africa, not just the ANC. So, and you can find pictures of Cyril Ramaphosa going to doing speeches at South African Communist Party events where the entire background is just hammer and sickles. It actually looks like it's been photoshopped. But yeah, people don't believe you when you show them that imagery. So yeah, the ANC have no problem with communists. They actually are in a very tight alliance with them. So before I continue, if you have any questions about this topic that I'm discussing, you can. I'll be glad to read them in the chat, and I'll address them. Also, your comments are very much appreciated. So let's move on to the second piece that I wrote this year on the cargo cult phenomenon, and this was when the lockdowns were in effect. This was in November 2020, and I titled it "Second Lockdown: South Africa's own cargo cult expands its collection of misguided rituals." So it starts. In October 2019, I wrote a piece, The Contemporary Cargo Cult of the Southern Tip of Africa, in which I outlined the cargo cult phenomenon, as well as my reasoning for arguing that the ANC exhibits the same type of irrational behavior. 1 year later, it appears that the ANC and its cargo cult leader, President Cyril Ramaphosa, are not only persisting with their well-established checklist of rituals, but have indeed adopted a second wave of brand new ones. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic was not the only thing that originated in China and spread across the globe like wildfire. The ritual of national lockdowns did the same. Most governments tried to imitate the lockdown pioneers in order not to risk appearing indecisive or weak, while others quite clearly set out to outdo their counterparts with more draconian lockdown measures. The South African government fails. They do fail, but the South African government falls into the latter category. I think it was Adams Roots that said, "Thank goodness for the ANC's shocking incompetence, or else we would be actually in a worse situation if they could implement their plans with efficiency and without the maladministration." So that's our saving grace to a large extent, ironically. Also interesting, before I continue, when I talk here about South Africa imitating other countries and countries imitating the lockdown pioneers, South Africa seems to have pioneered quite a few lockdown policies or COVID-related policies that other countries are imitating now. South Africa was the pioneer for race-based relief when it comes to COVID, having a race criteria when it comes to COVID relief for struggling businesses. And then we heard from the Biden administration in America that they also are considering using race as a criteria for their relief funds. So it seems that Cyril is making quite the impression overseas. And then you see also the same type of lockdowns and alcohol bans or lockdown measures and alcohol bans that were implemented in South Africa happening in other countries, but afterwards. So it seems that we were definitely an inspiration globally. So well done, South Africa. Before I continue, maybe I'll continue and then I'll answer your questions after I've completed this or finished reading this piece. So you can all, if you have any questions, you can post them now and I'll get to them right after this. Let's see. Okay. So with the economy already in tatters, the ANC opted for one of the strictest and longest national lockdowns in the world. Before I continue, how's that 21-day lockdown going, gents? Longest 21 days of my life. All right, now continue. Enforcing measures such as curfew and banning the sale of alcohol and cigarettes and certain types of clothing and food even. Measures which would make even the world's most hardcore authoritarians blush. However, despite the strongman approach to saving lives, South Africa in October 2020, close to when I wrote this opinion piece, ranked 12th in the world for most COVID-19 cases. I think we're still in that region. So what does this tell us about our own cargo cult at the helm? The ANC has shown a blind commitment to a lockdown medicine which is holistically more harmful than the virus, and their apparent eagerness to take a second dose of the toxic poison called lockdown indicates a party motivated not by reality, but by superstitious imitation. Just as the original cargo cults of the Melanesian islands ritualistically built mock airports with sticks and stones, believing that it would bring prosperity, the ANC is imitating what it sees abroad in a ritualistic and often exaggerated fashion. The best example of ritual trumping reality is the fact that as soon as European countries started planning second lockdowns in preparation for an imminent second wave of COVID-19, the ANC, like clockwork, also started with public warnings about a possible second lockdown. So this was before the second lockdown. A fact that needs to be considered, which exposes the entire charade, is the fact that those countries plotting second lockdowns are almost all located in the northern hemisphere, which is entering winter in December, while South Africa will be donning shorts and hitting the beaches during that time. So maybe for some context and some hindsight, we did experience a second wave after all, but that was due to the new South African strain, not the old strain, which I find very interesting. That the second wave did arrive eventually, but all thanks to a new South African strain. And at that time, before you knew about this new strain, we were still going into lockdown because of that there will be a resurgence, just as we saw in the European countries. But those European countries were entering winter. So for those that needed an excuse for another lockdown, that second strain was quite the godsend for them. Let's see. Okay, and I continue. Further evidence that the ANC is not driven by reality, but rather by ritual, is the fact that in 2019, and this is important, 64,000 South Africans died of tuberculosis, yet there has never been a TB lockdown. Why then has the South African government persisted with locking down the entire country to curb the virus, which has ostensibly shown itself to be substantially less life-threatening than TB? You can say the same thing about HIV and AIDS, where we now have mandated masks, but when it comes to safe intercourse, condoms aren't mandated by the law as masks are. Same logic. If you are mandating masks to save lives, you'd have to extend that logic to condoms as well, naturally. A textbook cult requires a charismatic leader. And even though, in my view, reading off a teleprompter is a charisma void, President Ramaphosa has proven himself to be the main cargo cultist, leading our people or his flock. When referencing the economic devastation South Africa has suffered in 2020, the president's rhetorical strategy becomes clear. Rather than to reflect on the corruption, major policy blunders, and devastating consequences of the extensive lockdown, which he championed all along, President Ramaphosa instead elects to attempt to gaslight the population into believing it was the virus which decimated our economy. This shrewd tactic admittedly serves four purposes, which I'll get into now. Firstly, it keeps the level of national fear surrounding the virus at a fever pitch. Secondly, it diverts attention away from the ANC's disastrous lockdown ritual. Thirdly, it employs the dangerous combination of fear and false reality to justify the continuation and further expansion of this bizarre lockdown ritual. And fourthly, it is used as scapegoat to hide the continued consequences of the ANC's disastrous economic policies that have been in effect since long before the lockdown. Let me just finish up here, almost done with my piece. The expression drinking the Kool-Aid refers to a person who believes in a doomed or dangerous idea because of mistakenly perceived potential high rewards. The phrase originates from the events in Jonestown, Guyana in 1978, when cult leader Jim Jones proposed revolutionary suicide by means of ingesting a mixed drink lethally laced with inter alia cyanide, killing 918 of his followers. The ANC has prepared us a deadly lockdown cocktail, laced with the National Democratic Revolution, paternalistic statism, critical race theory, and systemic corruption, and is calling it a tonic, like a true snake oil salesman. There is precious little time left for South Africans to snap out of their trance and to refuse the deadly Kool-Aid being offered, by emphatically declaring that the cargo cultist in chief and his loyalists aren't wearing any clothes. If we blindly follow, I fear South Africa's economy will suffer a similar revolutionary suicide as those poor souls in Jonestown who believe the utopian promises of their savior. And that's the end of my second opinion piece. So those are my two opinion pieces on the cargo cult phenomenon and how it relates to the ANC and in South Africa. And that's the thing, is that once you look at it through that lens, the more it's going to start making sense in regards to what's going on here. So don't be mistaken, the ANC is definitely also a machine for helping cadres dip into the gravy train. But at the same time, it is also filled with ideologues that are following this cargo cult mentality. And I think that's a perfect way to segue into our first question, which comes from Charles Erasmus, who says, is the cargo cult thinking only contemporary or a long-term systematic issue? Well, I think it started already in 1994 when the ANC took power. I think this cargo cult mentality was already inherent within the ANC when they took power. And you can just see it through many of their policies, but it's gotten worse as the ANC has relied more and more on ideology and less on practical economic solutions. I mean, in the 90s, there were many policies under pressure from the global community for the ANC to open up the economy, support free market policies. There was some semblance of that. But as the ANC, as the state funds were depleted, as the ANC just became more corrupt, they used ideology more and more as a crutch, and you can see it in their rhetoric as well. So Ramaphosa is not less of an ideologue than Jacob Zuma. To the contrary, so Ramaphosa actually uses, to my memory, a lot more revolutionary and ideological language than his predecessor. And that's what we get for the people that believe in this whole new dawn. You get Cyril Ramaphosa, who's pretty much at this point, you can say that he's just Jacob Zuma, but he can read from a teleprompter and pronounce numbers. Moving on to some other things I wanted to discuss that relate to this. So in 2021, I saw, after the State of the Nation address, I saw Peter Bruce, one of the big cheerleaders for the president. He said in an opinion piece that we should be lucky that we have a president, or we should be grateful we have a president that laughs and that can crack a joke. Well, Peter, it's a strange way. It's a strange way of saying we have a clown as a president, but it seems like it. But let's just go through the timeline. Before I continue there, so what's fascinating about this type of excuse making is how it's evolved in regards to what the reasoning what the reasoning of the New Dawners was in 2018 and what it's become in 2021. So let me just find it here. I actually summed it up pretty well on a tweet here. So in 2018, the New Dawners, their narrative was Ramaphosa will fix ESCOM and deal with ANC corruption. In 2019, the narrative changed a bit. It evolved to Ramaphosa's mission is being sabotaged by his own party, but he will start to deliver soon. Move on to 2020, the narrative changes a bit more. Corruption and load shedding are getting worse, but Ramaphosa just needs more time. Rome wasn't built in a day. Well, I think after 3 years, at least a few bricks were laid in the building of Rome. I don't think the same can be said for the Ramaphosa administration. And now in 2019, after all these little narrative changes, the narrative is just, well, at least he smiles, at least he can crack a joke. It's fascinating seeing the New Dawners in their desperation. I mean, their desperation is palpable. And something else that's interesting is that I see the New Dawners have also reached the Cyril is playing 4D chess stage of denial. Whenever there's like a cock up, it's just the excuse is always, no, but actually, if you look at the plan, this all makes sense. It's all part of his master plan to drain the swamp, if you will, when it comes to the ANC. I don't see any drainage going on there. Let's just check here. I saw here in the comments, Sideline Opinion said, cargo cult keeps the masses happy with promises of great future prosperity. Just be patient. We are playing the long game. Yes. That's also the new promise. Is just wait, just be patient. Well, it's hard looking a business owner that's lost everything, or a person starving, or a person that can't feed his family, and looking him in the eye and saying, just be patient, after 3 years. So yeah, Patrick says, the New Dawn was a joke. I knew it then. Well, congratulations. You were one of the oaks that actually could foresee, could see the joke. Desmond says, communism takes time. It's like a dormant disease. It bites you slowly. Yeah, well, that's how you eat an elephant, one little piece at a time. So yeah, when it comes to the New Dawners, they're getting quite desperate. It's actually, like I said, it's fascinating to see. But we have to start asking, and I also made this point the other day, we need to start seriously asking, how many funds or how much money must be looted, or how much money intended for the poor, the sick, the vulnerable, and the impoverished must be looted before cheerleading for this administration becomes an immoral, heinous act. There are still so many, especially the Sea Point cheerleaders and the Cape Town Tannies, Karens, the We Are Led crowd. At what point does cheerleading for this quite clearly conscienceless party become immoral? At what point does it become heinous? At what point do we respond with disdain? And that's why in 2020 I've been responding to a lot of stories with just the disdainious meme that I think it's Emperor Caracalla, aptly named, the bust of him where he's just looking in disdain. I think that's what they deserve. Desmond asks the big question. He asks, how does it get stopped? The answer isn't simple, but the answer is already in view. State-proof your life and your community. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but it's something that civil society organizations and many community organizations are already doing. Organizations like AfriForum, Solidarity. The building of Soltech, the private Afrikaans technical college, is an example of this. And that's why the ANC hates that story so much, because it embarrasses them so much. Where Panyaza Lesufi pays over 400 million to sanitize schools when the students aren't even there in just Gauteng alone. Solidarity, not to be confused with the Solidarity Fund. Tripartite, the trade union, takes less money. They take 300 million and they build a technical college for their community, a living monument. And it's not built with state funds. It's not built with Rupert or billionaire donations. It's built with little donations of 10 Rand, 50 Rand, 100 Rand from the community. It's crowdfunded. I think that's the bright side. And that's, to answer your question, that's how we stop it. Stop relying on the state. In Afrikaans, it says, it rolls off the tongue so well. It's hou op staat maak op die staat. Stop relying on the state. Also, if you're Afrikaans and you can get your hands on Flip Base's book, Die Pad na Selfbestuur, The Path to Self-Governance, definitely read that. Definitely recommend. Desmond says Soltech is a brilliant example. Well, thank you. Let me give chat a little bit more attention. Matthew van Huisteen says, I'll never understand the cheerleaders. How many times must the ANC take them for a ride before they wake up? It's insane. It's actually quite simple to explain. It's the soft bigotry of low expectations, where they look at, for example, the ANC, and they say, well, this is the best they can do. At least we have a president that can read a teleprompter and can pronounce numbers. When News 24 calls Cyril Ramaphosa's speech majestic, that's all you need to know. It reminds me of in grade 1, when you do like an oral presentation when you're like 7 years old, and the teacher tells you, Ernst, that was one of the best speeches I've ever heard in my life. You, my boy, are going to be president one day. It's that same type of mentality from these ANC cheerleaders. It's the soft bigotry of lowered expectations. They talk about ANC politicians like their children. And you can also extend that to pretty much how they talk about black people, these types of new dawners. They talk about them like their children. And then you have to ask the question, do they actually view them as children that they are tasked to babysit? It's that whole white man's burden thought process. Let's see. Kurunika says, you can only state-proof your life until a certain point. I want to live in a state governed by my own people and won't rest until it happens. Well, if you read Flip Base's book, Die Pad na Selfbestuur, he pretty much outlines everything. It doesn't help you follow a mentality of, I'm going to go draw a border in the sand and this is going to be my new country governed by my culture or my community or whatever. It starts very small. You do the dirty work first. You have to pretty much do the hard stuff first, and at the very end, you can plant a flag in it and say, well, this is our country now. This, whatever you've identified. Urania is a good example. Urania is not dreaming about becoming a massive state. It starts off by just saying, first and foremost, we're going to create a functioning town. Then we're going to create a functioning bigger town. Then we're going to create a functioning city. And that's the type of mentality that you need to follow. And I'm not talking to you specifically, Kronika, when I say, I think a lot of people, when they talk about freedom or independence, they think about the nice stuff, the things of, or when we have our own country, this is what the flag's going to look like. This is what the rugby team's going to be called. The borders are going to encompass Pretoria, Bloemfontein, Cape Town, Port Elizabeth, whatever. And they're not thinking about the dirty work, the real, like, getting down and into the mud and working. And that's the part that I think Urania does so brilliantly, is that they are doing the basic stuff first. Before dreaming about creating a functioning nation or a functioning country, you first need to create a functioning town. Don't play on hard mode if you still lose on easy. And that's what we're seeing there. And I think the Iranian mentality is what people need to adopt. Stop thinking in terms of what you want. Stop thinking in terms of what I want. Start thinking in terms of what am I willing to give up for freedom. Because that's the Iranian philosophy. That's what they did. They said, I'm willing to give up the shopping malls and all the convenient businesses and schools and universities and all the conveniences and suburbs that come with cities. I'm going to give all that up and go live in a piece of desert, in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere, in a dusty little town. But at least I'll have my freedom. That's the Iranian philosophy. And that gives legitimacy to their mission and to their goals. Is that they've proven not what they want, they've proven what they are willing to give up. And they are willing to give up a damn lot. But they're not willing to give up their freedom. And I think that's how you should approach it. Carl Green, we are not. He says, I love the statement he made. He's talking about Dirk Herman on my stream. I talked to him about Soltech. Dirk is the CEO of Solidariteit. You can go check out that episode afterwards if you haven't seen it. He said every brick laid is paid by a member and he can be very proud of it. Yes. Soltech is built by, I don't know how many bricks, but all those bricks, every one of them was sponsored by a member. So I think that's a beautiful symbolism. Let's see here. Ruter Geist says, most of the people in this modern age cannot survive without a state to provide for and protect them. Well, then we got to relearn what our ancestors knew, how to survive without this mega state. Relearn how to live as a community, relearn communitarianism to a large extent. And I wrote an entire opinion piece on this as well, the case for communitarianism. And pretty much my argument there is that the modern state tries to do everything that culture and community always did for thousands of years. So I think we can take inspiration from that. Our ancestors weren't as stupid as a lot of people think. They were made of the right stuff. If you are feeling a little bit black-pilled, feeling a bit demoralized, read a bit of history. I think you'll get some valuable perspective. Let's see, Desmond says, ANC keeps the people dependent on them. Social grants is their trump card. Well, the ANC openly brags about that social grants are increasing by millions. This year, 2 million more South Africans will be receiving social grants. They say as if it's their badge of honor, but it's actually a disgrace. They're not improving anyone's lives. They're just creating a dependent class. This is a very interesting point, Ruiter, who says, look at how fragile the system is in Texas. Temperature drops and the system falls apart. I think a lot of people underestimate just how fragile the system around them is and on what it hinges. I don't think a lot of people realize by how few engineers, plumbers, and electricians are keeping the system around them working, to put it very simply. Yes, Road Treater says, relearn and focus. Yeah, there's a lot of inspiration to be taken from the past. Go look a bit in terms of what our ancestors built and what they were able to accomplish with a much smaller database of shared knowledge from internationally or whatever. Sideliner Opinion says, the fourth industrial revolution wants to create super dependent, obedient citizens who do not think for themselves. Well, that's the status dream. That's the Great Reset that you're describing there. So something else that I think deserves mentioning is that there's a lot of commentators or in the commentariat that used to be very staunch anti-Solidarite and AfriForum critics that are starting to see the light now with Soltech being built and also with all the successes of AfriForum and Solidarity. So those include Peter Bruce, Max du Preez, Nicholas Bauer. They've all come out and said, you know what, we don't really, I'm paraphrasing, we don't really like AfriForum and Solidarity, but damn, they get things done. And yeah, they're calling, I mean, Max du Preez directly called for I think it was, AfriForum and Solidarity, but for all South Africans. Well, as Dirk Herman said in our interview, the secret to the success of AfriForum and Solidarity is that cultural energy behind it. If you take that community energy away, you're not going to achieve anything. So you need a community behind these types of institutions and these types of organizations to really keep them energized. But I would love, absolutely love, for other communities in South Africa to emulate Solidarity and AfriForum. I would love Zulu Solidarity or Xhosa AfriForum. Please do it. It would be amazing. It would be such a great step in the right direction. Stop depending on the state. You can do it. I see Hindo's in the chat. Hindo says, good evening. Good evening, sir. I hope everything is going well. So yeah, when it comes to the ANC, I don't completely buy into a lot of this speculation when it comes from our top analysts saying that 2024 is the year that the ANC is going to lose power, or there's going to be the breaking year for the ANC. I think their support is pretty crystallized, and I think I'm going to have a future episode with Russell Lamberti on it, because when he was on the show a few weeks back, he actually mentioned he went on a tangent and he went into where ANC support comes from, what drives it, and but then he realized that he's going way off topic, so then he reined himself in. But I really want to get into that, so I'll definitely have him on to talk about where ANC support comes from and what's the mentality behind it. Desmond says, my state of mind was extremely negative for the future of our children, but I started to realize that the future for them is my responsibility, and I will do anything to assist like-minded South Africans. Well, there you go. That's like what I said as well in my chat with Quentin Ferreira, I think two episodes back, in the episode titled Origin Myths and How to Save Your Community. It starts small. I mean, I don't want to plagiarize Jordan Peterson completely, but there's a lot of truth, even though it might have become a little bit of a cliche in regards to sorting out your own life first. Make sure your household is operating smoothly and is a good environment. Next, make sure your street is clean and your community is thriving. And then you expand slowly from there. You were told especially my generation and the millennials, and I think a little bit of Gen X as well, were told a horrible lie in school. The lie that you should strive to save the world. You should try to be president one day. You should try to save everyone. It's not possible. The only solution is to start small. Save your house first. Save your street first. Save your community first. That's how it starts. That's much more reasonable and realistic. Because if you go on that approach of I want to save the world or I want to save the country, you're gonna get blackballed and nihilistic very quickly, because it's just not possible. You have to start small. Save your street first. Something as simple as learning the name of your neighbor is already a step in the right direction. Hindu says, chilling, Carl will go promote this live stream now. Well, thank you very much, Hindu. I appreciate that. Carl just put that episode that I mentioned a while back in the descriptions. I think it was the chat with Quentin. You can check it out. There's a link to that. So yeah, when it comes to these types of solutions, that's why Soltec is such a big thing. It's a symbolic victory just as much as it is a practical victory. I visited Soltec just the other day, a few days ago, and it was a great experience. I mean, seeing students working hard at work, world-class institution. Everything is running smoothly. It looks amazing. The symbolism is incredible. Um, and at the end of the year, they're going to have 900 students. And that's why it's such a thorn in the ANC side, but also why it's captivated so many people's imaginations, why so many people feel empowered and inspired by it, is the fact that nobody would have thought that it could be done. A community coming together to build this entire college. But now it is done. Solidarity have the CV. I can put it on their CV now. That's what's important, and that's why it's such a strong symbol. And on that note, next week, Tuesday, I'm talking to Paul van Deventer, the managing director of Soltec, about Soltec, but also specifically about trades, learning a trade, and why there is pride in it, and why people in the trades are such an important thing when it comes to the society around you. And Soltec's role in that. Yeah, Carl Green says, I'm looking forward to the learning and trade stream. Yeah, that's going to be Tuesday at 7 CAT, Central Africa time. Graham says, bro, I always try to catch the caracal when I can. Well, thank you very much, Graham. Much appreciated. So yeah, tonight's stream was specifically to unpack the cargo cult phenomenon, because I see more and more people using it, which is very nice to see. I think it's such an interesting and useful lens to look at ANC policies through and ANC behavior through, to make more sense of what's going on. As I said, this is specifically in relation to the ideologues within the party. Of course, there are people only motivated by how much can they loot, but like I said, don't be mistaken. There are some major ideologues within the ANC that think that they are bringing about the national democratic revolution. This is the way forward. And it's particularly those type of cadres that I'm analyzing with these pieces. So I wanted to use this stream, this discussion stream, just to get into those two pieces, and specifically the cargo cult phenomenon. And I hope some of you have learned something new or found it interesting. Sideline Opinion said, well-trained tradesmen literally lay the foundations of communal life. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm also looking forward to that stream on Tuesday. I hope to see a lot of you there. So yeah, thank you very much for tuning in, guys. This was an excellent stream. As I said, links to everything is in the description. If you like these types of mugs, my introduction on it, there's a link to that in the description as well. As I said, only if you really find it cool and you want it, you can go check it out. There's also hoodies and buffs, but don't feel obligated. I'm not starving. I don't need the money to keep the channel alive. It's just if you find it cool and you want to support the channel, it will actually help me. I will use all those funds, firstly to buy a new microphone, then also some other technical stuff to make the content even better. So that's in the description. And also go join the Telegram channel. There's also a link to that in the description, so you can keep up to date with the latest episodes. And then lastly, tune in next week, Tuesday, when I will be talking to Paul about Soltec and also trades and why you should learn a trade. Don't learn to code, learn a trade. So anyway, guys, I hope you have an excellent evening. Good luck with the rest of the week. I know a lot of you need that little bit of luck. And enjoy your weekend. I hope you have an excellent weekend. So cheers, guys. Have a good one, and God bless.